The sky above Tahlequah, Oklahoma Territory, painted a grim backdrop as 20-year-old Willow Norwood stumbled through the muddy street, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders to hide her swollen belly from prying eyes. It was 1884, and the small frontier town nestled in the Cherokee Nation had become a prison of whispers and pointed fingers for the young woman who'd lost everything but the child growing inside her. "There she goes again," a voice hissed from the wooden boardwalk. "That poor excuse for a woman." Willow kept her gaze fixed on the rutted road ahead, pretending not to hear. 6 months pregnant and unwed, she'd become the favorite subject of Tahlequah's gossip since her parents had cast her out, leaving her to fend for herself in the one-room cabin at the edge of town that belonged to her late grandmother. "Should be ashamed, showing her face in decent company," another woman muttered, pulling her children closer as if Willow's condition might be contagious. Tears stung Willow's eyes as she quickened her pace, the small basket of mending work she'd completed dangling from her arm. The local seamstress, Mrs. Henley, was one of the few who would still offer her work, though even she insisted Willow come for payment at the end of the day when most customers had gone. The sudden crack of thunder overhead matched the ache in Willow's heart. 6 months ago, she'd believed William Harper's promises of marriage and a life together. Then he disappeared with a cattle drive heading to Kansas, leaving nothing but a growing child and broken dreams behind. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as Willow reached Mrs. Henley's shop, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. The older woman glanced up from her ledger, her expression a mixture of pity and judgment that had become all too familiar. "Your stitching is improving," Mrs. Henley said, examining the shirts and dresses Willow had repaired. "Still, I had to tell the widow Patterson that you'd handled her Sunday dress. She nearly took her business elsewhere." Willow swallowed hard. "I'm grateful for the work, Mrs. Henley," the woman sighed, counting out coins from the register. "There's 75 cents. It would have been $1, but considering the circumstances." She let the sentence hang between them. Willow nodded, accepting the coins without protest. Every penny mattered now. "Thank you, girl, Mrs. Henley said as Willow turned to leave, her voice softening slightly. "You should consider leaving Tahlequah. There are places for women in your situation. Places where they take in unfortunates until the baby comes, then find it a proper home." Willow's hand instinctively covered her belly. "This is my child, Mrs. Henley, the only family I have left." The older woman shook her head. "Pride is a luxury you can't afford anymore, Willow." Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the street into a river of mud. Willow clutched her shawl tighter and began the long walk home, each step becoming more difficult as the wet earth clung to her boots. The coins in her pocket felt impossibly light against the weight of her circumstances. She was halfway home when a group of young men emerged from the saloon ahead. Willow's heart sank as she recognized Thomas Blackburn and his friends, the sons of prominent townspeople who had made tormenting her a favorite pastime. "Well, look who it is," Thomas called, sauntering into her path. "The town's fallen dove out for an evening stroll." "Please let me pass," Willow said quietly, attempting to step around him. Thomas blocked her way. "Not so quick to lift your skirts now, are you?" His companions laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the rainy evening. "I just want to go home," Willow said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Home, that shack by the creek." Another of the men stepped closer. "Here you've been taking in mending work. Wonder what else you'd take in for the right price." Shame and anger flooded Willow's face. "I am not what you think." "We all know exactly what you are," Thomas snapped, reaching for her arm. "A girl who spread her legs for the first man who smiled at her, then got what she deserved. Let her go." The voice cut through the rain like a whip crack, low and dangerous. All heads turned toward the tall figure approaching from the direction of the livery stable. The stranger moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat, obscuring his features until he stepped into the glow of the saloon's lamplight. He was perhaps 25, with rain-darkened sandy hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. A gun belt hung low on his hips, and the way his hand rested near it suggested he knew how to use it. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, a cattleman or perhaps a rancher rather than a drifter. "This isn't your concern, stranger," Thomas said, though he released Willow's arm. "I'm making it my concern." The man's gaze flicked to Willow, taking in her condition and the fear in her eyes before returning to Thomas. "Where I come from, men who harass women aren't considered men at all." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his companions for support. "You don't understand. This girl is walking home in the rain and being accosted by men who should know better," the stranger finished. "That's all I need to understand." For a moment, tension crackled between them like the lightning overhead. Then Thomas shrugged, attempting a dismissive laugh. "Keep your nose out of Tahlequah business, cowboy. The girl ain't worth fighting over anyway." As the young men retreated toward the saloon, Willow sagged with relief, suddenly lightheaded. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet as exhaustion and the day's emotions overwhelmed her. Strong hands caught her before she could fall. The stranger held her steady, concern etched across his features. "Easy now. When's the last time you ate something?" The question brought fresh tears to Willow's eyes. She couldn't remember yesterday morning, perhaps. She'd been saving what little food she had. Without another word, the man gently guided her toward the nearby hotel, shielding her from the rain with his own body. When her legs threatened to give out, he swept her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, her basket of mending still clutched in her hands. "I can walk," Willow protested weakly. "I know you can," he replied, "but you shouldn't have to right now." Inside the hotel dining room, he settled her at a corner table, away from the curious stares of other diners. He ordered hot beef stew, fresh bread, and tea, ignoring the proprietor's raised eyebrows at Willow's presence. "I can't pay for this," Willow whispered, mortified. "You don't have to." He removed his hat, revealing the full contours of a face both handsome and weathered by sun and wind. "I'm Griffin Vance. I arrived in town this afternoon looking for work at the Henderson Ranch, Willow Norwood," she replied hesitantly. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Vance?" Griffin's eyes softened. "Because you looked like you needed it, and because those boys needed a reminder about how to treat a lady." "I'm not much of a lady anymore, according to this town," Willow said bitterly. The food arrived, steam rising invitingly from the bowl of stew. Griffin waited until she'd taken a few bites before speaking again. "Towns like this have short memories," he said. "They'll find something new to talk about eventually." Willow shook her head. "Not about this." She gestured to her belly. "Not about me." Griffin studied her for a long moment. "The father, gone, headed to Kansas with a cattle drive. He promised to send for me, but—" She trailed off, the familiar ache of betrayal washing over her anew. Griffin nodded, understanding without requiring more explanation. "And your family," my father said I was dead to him. "My mother couldn't or wouldn't stand against him." Willow stared into her tea. "My grandmother left me her cabin when she died last year. It's not much, but it's mine. It's all I have to give my child." As she spoke, a fresh wave of dizziness overtook her. The room spun alarmingly, and she gripped the edge of the table. "Willow." Griffin's voice seemed to come from far away. She felt herself sliding from the chair, her vision darkening at the edges. The last thing she remembered was Griffin's strong arms catching her, cradling her head as he lowered her gently to the floor. "I will protect you," he murmured, his worried face the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her. When Willow opened her eyes again, she found herself in an unfamiliar bed, sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Panic surged through her as she sat up abruptly, one hand flying to her belly. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. "You're safe and the baby's fine." A plump, middle-aged woman with kind eyes stood at the bedside, a damp cloth in her hand. "I'm Martha Crowley. This is my boarding house. Mr. Vance brought you here last night when you fainted. Mr. Vance." Willow's memories came flooding back, the rain, the confrontation, the tall cowboy who'd intervened. "He paid for this room for a week," Martha explained, adjusting the pillows behind Willow's back. "The doctor's been by as well. Said you were suffering from exhaustion and poor nutrition, which isn't good for you or the little one." Shame heated Willow's cheeks. "I can't accept such charity. I need to go home." Dr. Henderson was quite clear that you need rest, Martha insisted firmly. Besides, Mr. Vance is determined you stay put until you're stronger. As if summoned by his name, there was a soft knock at the door and Griffin entered, carrying a tray laden with food. His hair was damp as if freshly washed, and he'd changed into clean clothes, dark trousers, and a blue shirt that brought out the gray in his eyes. "You're awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," Willow admitted, "and embarrassed." "You shouldn't have gone to such trouble for a stranger." Griffin set the tray across her lap: eggs, toast, bacon, and a small bowl of preserved peaches. "Eat first, then we'll talk." Martha excused herself with a knowing smile that Willow pretended not to see. When the door closed, she looked up at Griffin, who had taken a seat in the chair beside the bed. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly. Griffin considered her question for a moment. "6 years ago, my younger sister found herself in a similar situation. The man responsible disappeared and our father threw her out. She tried to make her way to our aunt in Colorado." His voice tightened. "She never made it. They found her on the trail, having given birth alone. Both she and the baby died." The pain in his eyes was raw and real, making Willow's throat constrict with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. I was working a ranch in Texas when it happened. By the time word reached me, it was too late." Griffin's hands clenched briefly on his knees. "I promised myself I'd never stand by again if I could help." Willow lowered her gaze to the food, taking a small bite of toast to give herself time to process his words. "That explains last night, but not." She gestured around the room. "This, the doctor, a week's lodging." "I've been hired on at the Henderson Ranch," Griffin explained. "Good pay, and I've been saving for years. I can afford to help, and you need it." "I can't repay you," Willow said softly. "I'm not asking you to." Griffin leaned forward. "Look, I know this town's been cruel to you. I've seen it before, folks who claim to be Christian on Sunday but forget about charity and forgiveness come Monday. But you don't have to face it alone anymore." Willow stared at him, this stranger who spoke as if her welfare mattered, who looked at her without judgment or scorn. Something inside her that had been coiled tight for months began to loosen just slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate but all she had to offer. Griffin nodded, seemingly understanding everything she couldn't say. "Finish your breakfast. Dr. Henderson will be back to check on you this afternoon." Over the next few days, Willow regained her strength under Martha Crowley's motherly care. The boarding house keeper treated her with a kindness Willow had almost forgotten existed, bringing nutritious meals and talking to her as if she were any other young woman, not the town pariah. Griffin visited every evening after his work at the Henderson Ranch, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, fresh wildflowers, or candied almonds from the general store. They talked for hours, Willow gradually sharing the story of her life. Her childhood in Tahlequah, the death of her beloved grandmother, and how she'd fallen for William Harper's charming words and promises of a future together. "He was passing through with a cattle outfit," she explained on the third evening, as they sat in the small parlor Martha had tactfully left to their use. "He courted me for a month, said we'd get married when he returned from the Kansas drive. By the time I realized I was carrying his child, he was long gone." Griffin's jaw tightened. "Did you try to contact him?" "I wrote to the ranch in Kansas where he said they were delivering the cattle. The letter came back marked no such person known here." Willow smoothed her hands over her rounded belly. "I don't even know if he gave me his real name." "I'm sorry," Griffin said simply. "The worst part wasn't losing him," Willow admitted. "It was discovering how quickly the town turned on me. People who'd known me my whole life suddenly looked through me as if I didn't exist, or worse, as if I was something dirty." Griffin reached across and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Their judgment says more about them than it does about you." By the end of the week, Willow knew she couldn't stay at the boarding house indefinitely, despite Griffin's insistence that he could continue paying. Her pride wouldn't allow it, and she needed to return to her grandmother's cabin and the independence it represented, tenuous though it might be. "At least let me help get it ready," Griffin said when she announced her decision. Martha says you've been living with a leaky roof and a door that doesn't latch properly. How would Martha know that? Willow asked, surprised. Griffin looked slightly sheepish. I might have asked around about your situation. The next day being Sunday, Griffin arrived at the boarding house early, a wagon loaded with lumber, tools, and supplies. Together, they made the journey to Willow's cabin, situated on a small plot of land near the creek that ran along the outskirts of town. The cabin was indeed in poor repair, a single room with a stone fireplace, its roof patched in places and its windows covered with oiled paper rather than glass. Inside was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair that had been her grandmother's pride. Griffin surveyed the structure with a practiced eye. The foundation's solid, at least. I can have this weathertight before sundown. While Willow sorted through her meager belongings and aired out the musty bedding, Griffin set to work. He moved with confident efficiency, replacing rotted boards, securing the door with a proper latch, and patching the roof. By mid-afternoon, he had installed real glass in the window frames, a luxury Willow hadn't dared hope for. Those windows must have cost a fortune, she protested when she saw them. Griffin shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. Got them at a good price from the mercantile. Owner was clearing out old stock. Willow suspected he was lying to spare her pride, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she made coffee on the small stove and set out the bread and cheese Martha had packed for them. As they sat at the table sharing this simple meal, Willow found herself studying Griffin's profile against the sunlight streaming through the new windows. In just a week, he had become the most important person in her life, her defender, her friend, and perhaps something more that she dared not name. What happens now? She asked quietly. Griffin met her gaze. That depends on what you want, Willow. I don't know what I want, she admitted, except for my baby to have a chance at a good life without carrying the weight of my mistakes. Having a child isn't a mistake, Griffin said firmly. And neither is trusting someone who proved unworthy of that trust. Willow's eyes filled with tears. The town will never see it that way. My child will always be the bastard of the woman who shamed herself. Griffin reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Then maybe Tahlequah isn't where you're meant to stay. Before Willow could respond, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. Griffin rose to answer it, one hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. On the porch stood Dr. Henderson, his medical bag in hand and a concerned expression on his lined face. Miss Norwood, Mr. Vance, I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Doctor, Willow said, rising to greet him. Is something wrong? Martha Crowley mentioned you'd returned home today. I thought I'd check on you given your condition. His gaze took in the improvements to the cabin with obvious surprise. I see you've been busy, Mr. Vance. Griffin nodded. Just some basic repairs, Doctor. Henderson set his bag on the table. If you don't mind, Miss Norwood, I'd like to examine you. Make sure you and the baby are progressing well. Griffin excused himself to continue working outside while the doctor conducted his examination. When he returned, Henderson was packing up his instruments, a thoughtful expression on his face. The baby appears healthy, he informed them. But I'm concerned about your isolation out here, Miss Norwood. You're what, 6 months along now? Nearly 7, Willow corrected. Henderson nodded. When your time comes, you shouldn't be alone. The nearest midwife is in Fort Gibson, a good 20 miles away. I have some savings, Willow began, but the doctor waved her off. Money isn't the issue, it's the practicality of getting help quickly when labor begins. He glanced between them. I assumed from what I saw in town that you two were. Well, that there might be an arrangement forthcoming. Willow's cheeks flamed. Dr. Henderson, Mr. Vance has been kind enough to help me, but we're not. I intend to look after Willow and her child, Griffin interrupted firmly. In whatever capacity she'll allow. The doctor raised his eyebrows but nodded. I see. Well, that's reassuring to hear. Still, Miss Norwood, you should consider having someone stay with you as your time approaches. These matters can be unpredictable. After Henderson left, an awkward silence filled the cabin. Willow busied herself washing the coffee cups, her mind racing with the implications of Griffin's words to the doctor. Did you mean what you said? she finally asked, her back still turned to him. Griffin moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Every word, Willow turned slowly to face him. "Why, you barely know me." "I know enough," Griffin said simply. "I know you're brave and proud and determined to give your child a good life, no matter the cost to yourself. I know you faced cruelty with more dignity than those who judged you deserve." His hand rose to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "And I know that from the moment I saw you in that rainy street, something inside me recognized you not as a stranger, but as someone I've been looking for without realizing it." Tears spilled down Willow's cheeks. "I have nothing to offer you, Griffin. No dowry, no unblemished name, not even a promise that my heart can trust again after what happened." "I'm not asking for any of that," Griffin replied, wiping her tears with his thumb. "Just the chance to prove that not all men make promises they don't intend to keep." Later that night, after Griffin had reluctantly departed for his lodgings at the Henderson Ranch, promising to return the next day, Willow sat in her grandmother's rocking chair, one hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby kicked vigorously. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Could we trust him? Could we dare to hope again?" The baby's only answer was another firm kick, as if encouraging her to take the risk. The following weeks brought a gradual transformation to Willow's life. Griffin spent every free moment at the cabin, continuing his improvements, building shelves, constructing a cradle from polished oak, and digging a proper well closer to the house. Word of his devotion to the fallen Willow Norwood spread through Tahlequah like wildfire, causing nearly as much scandal as her pregnancy had. Some, like Martha Crowley and Dr. Henderson, viewed the development with approval. Others, including Griffin's employer, Jeremiah Henderson, were less enthusiastic. "The old man cornered me yesterday," Griffin told Willow one evening as they sat on the porch he'd added to the front of the cabin. "Said I was risking my reputation by taking up with a woman of questionable virtue." Willow's heart sank. "I've cost you respect in town," Griffin snorted. "Respect I don't want if it comes at the price of abandoning what's right." He took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Besides, Henderson changed his tune quick enough when I reminded him I'm the best horse trainer he's had in years. Seems his principles are flexible when it might cost him money." Despite Griffin's dismissal of the town's opinion, Willow still faced cold shoulders and whispers when she ventured into Tahlequah for supplies. The worst confrontation came in early October, when she encountered Eliza Harper Williams' sister outside the general store. "Well, if it isn't my brother's mistake," Eliza said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Still pretending that child you're carrying has a right to the Harper name," Willow stiffened, clutching her basket tighter. "I've never claimed anything from your family, Eliza." "Only because you knew we'd run you out of town if you tried," Eliza sneered. "William wrote us all about the desperate girl who threw herself at him, claiming to be in love after a single dance." The accusation stung all the more for the grain of truth it contained. Willow had fallen quickly for William's charm, too young and naive to recognize the hollow promises for what they were. "Your brother made me promises," Willow said quietly. "If he wrote to tell you otherwise, then he's a liar as well as a coward." Eliza's face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" "Williams made a respectable marriage to a banker's daughter in Wichita. He doesn't need your lies following him." The revelation that William was married, had likely been married or promised to another, even as he'd wooed her, struck Willow like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, one hand going to support her now prominent belly. "I see you found another fool to take you in," Eliza continued, glancing meaningfully toward the livery where Griffin's horse was tethered. "That cowboy must be desperate indeed to saddle himself with another man's leavings." Before Willow could respond, Griffin himself appeared at her side, his expression thunderous as he'd clearly overheard the exchange. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I suggest you consider very carefully what you say next about the woman who will soon be my wife." A shocked murmur ran through the small crowd that had gathered to witness the confrontation. Eliza's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, her face paling at the steel in Griffin's tone. "Your wife," she finally managed to sputter. "You'd marry her knowing she's carrying my brother's bastard." "I'd marry her precisely because I know the kind of woman she is, one strong enough to face this town's cruelty rather than abandon her child." Griffin's arm slipped protectively around Willow's waist. "And that child will have my name, which is a damn sight more honorable than your brother could claim." Taking Willow's basket, he guided her away from the speechless Eliza and the stunned onlookers toward where his horse waited. "I'm sorry," he said once they were out of earshot. "I shouldn't have spoken for you that way or announced intentions I haven't properly discussed with you." Despite the turmoil of emotions Eliza's words had caused, Willow found herself smiling. "Did you mean it?" Griffin stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Every word." "I was planning to ask you properly, had a whole speech prepared and everything." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Wasn't supposed to happen like this, with half the town watching and you upset." "Ask me now," Willow said softly. Griffin's eyes widened. Then, to her surprise, he knelt right there in the dusty street, still holding her hand. "Willow Norwood, I love you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing in the rain, refusing to break despite everything. I want to build a life with you and your child, our child, if you'll let me claim that honor." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Willow's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Griffin rose to his feet, and right there on the main street of Tahlequah, with curious eyes still watching from store windows and porches, he kissed her gently at first, then with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. That evening, sitting before the fireplace in the cabin that now felt truly like home, they made plans for their future. "We should marry soon," Griffin said, his fingers absently stroking Willow's hair as she rested against him. "Before the baby comes, who would perform the ceremony?" Willow wondered. "Reverend Collins won't. He made it clear months ago that I'm not welcome in his church." Griffin's expression darkened. "Then we'll find another way. Judge Parker comes through Fort Gibson every few months, or we could ride to Muskogee. They have a justice of the peace." "What about your job at the Henderson Ranch?" Willow asked. Griffin smiled. "I've been saving almost everything I've earned, and I've been talking with Sam Turner about his place west of town. He's moving to California, looking to sell 30 acres with a decent house and barn." Willow sat up straighter. "Griffin, that's the Turner homestead. It must cost a fortune." "Not as much as you'd think. The land needs work, and the house isn't fancy, but it's solid, better than this cabin for raising a family." His hand moved to cover hers over her belly. "And it's far enough from town that we won't have to face those people every day, but close enough to get help if needed." The idea was so perfect, so far beyond what Willow had dared to hope for herself and her child just months ago, that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Don't cry," Griffin murmured, wiping them away with his thumb. "I promised to protect you, remember, both of you." "I'm not sad," Willow assured him. I never thought I could be this happy again." Griffin's kiss was a promise more binding than any words could be. Later, as they sat together planning their new life, Willow felt the baby kick strongly, as if giving its approval to the future taking shape before them. They were married 2 weeks later by a Cherokee judge in Tahlequah, with only Dr. Henderson, Martha Crowley, and a few of Griffin's fellow ranch hands as witnesses. Willow wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped alter to accommodate her advanced pregnancy, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, Griffin's voice steady as he promised to love and cherish Willow and the child she carried as his own. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Griffin kissed her with a tenderness that made Martha dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. They moved into the Turner homestead the following day, Griffin having completed the purchase with his savings. The house was indeed solid, 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a front parlor with real glass windows that caught the autumn sunlight. The barn needed repairs, but the well was good, and the land itself was promising, with rich soil and a creek running along the southern boundary. "What do you think?" Griffin asked as they stood on the porch that first evening, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Willow leaned into his embrace, feeling truly at peace for the first time in months. "I think it's perfect, our own little kingdom." Griffin chuckled, his hand splayed protectively over her belly where their child, for she had come to think of the baby as theirs, moved restlessly. "A kingdom needs a prince or princess." "Not much longer now," Willow said, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety coloring her voice. According to Dr. Henderson, she had less than a month before the baby was due. The following weeks were a flurry of activity as they prepared both the house and themselves for the child's arrival. Griffin worked tirelessly, making repairs to the barn and building corrals for the horses he planned to buy and train. Willow set up the nursery in the smaller bedroom, placing the oak cradle Griffin had made near the window where morning light would filter through. Martha Crowley visited often, bringing baby clothes she'd sewn and practical advice about childbirth and infant care. Even Dr. Henderson made regular visits, refusing payment with a gruff, "Consider it a wedding present." As Willow's time grew nearer, Griffin rarely left her side, arranging for a young Cherokee man named Joseph to help with the heavier work around the farm so he could remain close to the house. The tenderness with which he cared for her, rubbing her aching back, reading to her in the evenings, speaking softly to the baby through her stretched belly, only deepened Willow's love for the man who had saved her in more ways than one. The baby arrived on a cold November morning, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Willow woke to sharp pains and dampness between her thighs, instantly recognizing what was happening. "Griffin," she gasped, shaking her sleeping husband's shoulder. "It's time." Griffin was on his feet in an instant, his face a mixture of excitement and terror. "I'll get Dr. Henderson." "There's no time," Willow said, another contraction seizing her. "The baby's coming too fast." Griffin hesitated only a moment before sending Joseph to fetch the doctor while he helped Willow back into their bed. What followed was a blur of pain and fear for Willow, but through it all, Griffin remained her anchor, his voice steady as he encouraged her, his hands gentle as he followed the instructions she gasped out between contractions. When Dr. Henderson finally arrived, the baby's head was already crowning. The doctor took over with practiced efficiency, guiding Willow through the final stages of delivery while Griffin held her hand so tightly their fingers went white. "One more push," Henderson urged. "That's it, Willow, almost there." With a final, tremendous effort, Willow felt the baby slip from her body. A moment of terrifying silence followed, and then the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard, a strong, indignant cry that filled the room. "You have a son, Doctor," Henderson announced, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Willow's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Willow stared down at her child, their child, in wonder. He had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features scrunched in outrage at being thrust into the cold world. "Griffin," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Look what we made." Griffin's own eyes were wet as he gazed at his wife and son. "He's beautiful," he murmured, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek, "just like his mother." As Dr. Henderson finished tending to Willow, Griffin cradled his newborn son in his arms, a look of awe on his face. "What shall we name him?" Willow had been considering names for months but had settled on one only days earlier. "Samuel," she said, "after your father." Griffin's breath caught. She had never seen such naked emotion on his face as in that moment. "Samuel Vance," he said, testing the name. "It's perfect." In the weeks that followed, their small family settled into a rhythm centered around young Samuel's needs. The baby thrived under their care, growing stronger each day. Griffin proved to be a natural father, as comfortable changing diapers and walking a fussy infant at midnight as he was breaking wild horses. Winter descended on the Oklahoma Territory with bitter cold and occasional snowstorms. But inside their home, Willow and Griffin created a haven of warmth and love. On Christmas Eve, they sat before the fireplace, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his father's arms as Griffin presented Willow with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it curiously. "Open it," Griffin urged. Inside lay a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When Willow opened it, she found a tiny portrait of the three of them that Griffin had commissioned from a traveling photographer who'd passed through Tahlequah the previous week. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the miniature faces with her fingertip. Griffin smiled. "I wanted you to have something to remind you of how far we've come, how much we have to be thankful for." As he fastened the locket around her neck, his lips brushed the sensitive skin below her ear, sending a pleasant shiver through her body. Though Dr. Henderson had advised waiting until she fully recovered from childbirth, Willow found herself increasingly aware of Griffin as a man, the strength in his hands, the warmth of his body beside her in bed each night, the devotion in his eyes when he looked at her. That night, after placing Samuel in his cradle, they came together as husband and wife for the first time. Griffin's tenderness brought tears to Willow's eyes as he worshipped her changed body with gentle hands and whispered words of love. In his arms, she found a passion she hadn't known existed, one born of deep trust and genuine love rather than fleeting attraction. As winter gave way to spring, their little farm began to prosper. Griffin purchased 4 promising colts with the last of his savings, intending to train them for sale. His reputation as a horse trainer had spread beyond Tahlequah, bringing potential buyers from as far away as Fort Smith. Willow planted a vegetable garden behind the house and began selling eggs from their small flock of chickens to Martha Crowley, who used them in the boarding house. She also discovered a talent for making preserves and jams from the wild berries that grew along their creek, creating another small source of income. Samuel grew into a happy, sturdy baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. His first smile, first tooth, and first attempts to crawl were celebrated with a joy that sometimes overwhelmed Willow when she remembered how close she'd come to facing motherhood alone and outcast. As spring turned to summer, Tahlequah held its annual Independence Day celebration. Griffin surprised Willow by suggesting they attend. "Are you sure?" she asked hesitantly. Though they occasionally went into town for supplies, they had generally kept to themselves, avoiding social gatherings where they might face judgment. Griffin nodded, bouncing 5-month-old Samuel on his knee. "I'm sure. This is our son, our family. I won't have him or you hiding away as if we have something to be ashamed of." The celebration was held in the town square, with bunting decorating the storefronts and tables laden with food set up in the shade of old oak trees. As Willow and Griffin approached, Samuel dressed in his best gown and securely cradled in his mother's arms, a momentary hush fell over the nearest group of townspeople. Then Martha Crowley bustled forward, breaking the tension. "There you are. I was hoping you'd come. Let me see that beautiful boy of yours." She cooed over Samuel, who rewarded her with a toothless grin before leading them to a spot beneath one of the trees. Throughout the afternoon, Willow was surprised by how many people approached them with genuine warmth. Dr. Henderson and his wife insisted on holding Samuel. Several of Griffin's former colleagues from the Henderson ranch stopped by to admire the baby and discuss horses. Even Mrs. Henley, the seamstress who had once advised Willow to give up her child, complimented Samuel's handsome features. Not everyone was welcoming. Eliza Harper and her parents pointedly avoided them, as did Reverend Collins and a few of the town's more judgmental matrons. But their coldness was easier to bear with Griffin's steadfast presence beside her and the weight of their son in her arms. As the sun began to set, preparations for the fireworks display began. Griffin spread a blanket on a small hill overlooking the town square where they could watch in relative privacy. Samuel, overtired from the day's excitement, fell asleep against his father's chest, his tiny fist curled around Griffin's finger. "You were right to bring us here," Willow said softly as the first colorful explosions lit up the night sky. "I was afraid, but this is Samuel's heritage to this town, these people." Griffin's arm tightened around her shoulders. "The ones worth knowing have accepted us. The rest don't matter." As they watched the fireworks together, their son sleeping peacefully despite the noise, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Less than a year ago, she had stood alone in the rain, mocked and abandoned with no hope for the future. Now she sat surrounded by love, with a husband who cherished her and a son who brought joy to every day. The summer passed in a haze of heat and hard work. Griffin's horse training business began to flourish, with buyers coming from as far as Texas to purchase his expertly trained mounts. Willow's garden yielded a bountiful harvest, enough for their own needs with plenty left to preserve for winter or sell in town. Samuel continued to thrive, learning to sit up on his own and attempting to crawl with determined, if uncoordinated, efforts. His personality emerged more each day, stubborn like his mother, observant like his father, and possessed of a laugh that could melt the hardest heart. In late August, as Willow was hanging laundry to dry in the hot Oklahoma sun, a rider approached their farm. She shielded her eyes, recognizing Joseph, their part-time helper returning from an errand in town. His expression as he dismounted told her something was wrong. "Mrs. Vance," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "There's a man in town asking after you, says his name is William Harper." Willow's heart seemed to stop. The clothespin she'd been holding fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. "William is here, in Tahlequah," Joseph nodded grimly. "At the hotel, his sister told him about the baby, I think. He's been asking where to find you." Willow's mind raced. After all this time, why would William return? What could he possibly want from her now? "Thank you, Joseph," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Is Mr. Vance still at the north pasture?" "Yes, madam. Want me to fetch him?" Willow considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I'll speak with him when he returns. Please don't mention this to anyone else for now." After Joseph left, Willow went inside to check on Samuel, who was napping in his cradle. The sight of her son's peaceful face, so trusting in sleep, steeled her resolve. Whatever William Harper wanted, he would not disrupt the life she and Griffin had built. She was sitting on the porch, Samuel on her lap, when Griffin returned from the pasture that evening. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, sitting beside her and brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Willow took a deep breath. "William Harper is in town. Joseph told me he's been asking where to find us." Griffin went very still, his expression hardening. "What does he want?" "I don't know," Willow admitted. "But I'm afraid he might try to claim some rights to Samuel." Griffin's hand moved protectively to cover their son's back. "Samuel is my son in every way that matters. I adopted him legally when we married." "I know," Willow said softly, "but I'm still afraid." Griffin pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Don't be. Whatever Harper wants, he can't take what's ours." They didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, as Griffin was working with one of the young colts in the corral near the house, a rented buggy came up the drive. Willow, who was shelling peas on the porch with Samuel playing on a blanket beside her, felt her heart race as she recognized the man driving it. William Harper looked much as she remembered, handsome in a polished way, with fashionable clothes and carefully styled hair. But as he drew closer, she noticed changes. A certain hardness around his mouth, a calculating look in his eyes that she'd been too naive to see before. Griffin abandoned his work immediately, moving to stand protectively between the buggy and the porch where Willow and Samuel were. William pulled the buggy to a stop, eyeing Griffin with obvious assessment before his gaze shifted to Willow and the baby. "So it's true," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "You did have my child." Griffin's stance widened slightly. "This is private property, Harper." "State your business." William climbed down from the buggy, dusting off his expensive suit with practiced nonchalance. "My business is with Willow and my son." He attempted to move past Griffin, who blocked his path. "My wife has nothing to say to you," Griffin said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And Samuel is my son, legally and in every other way that counts." William's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The law recognizes blood ties, Cowboy. That boy carries Harper blood, not Vance." Willow stood, lifting Samuel protectively into her arms. "Why are you here, William?" "You made your choice when you left without a word. You're married now to a banker's daughter in Wichita, I hear." A flash of surprise crossed William's face. "Eliza has a loose tongue. Yes, I'm married. Elizabeth's father owns the third largest bank in Kansas." His gaze shifted to Samuel, who was watching the stranger with solemn eyes. "But it seems my wife is barren. 2 years of marriage and not even a hint of a child," understanding dawned, filling Willow with cold dread. "You want Samuel," she whispered. William shrugged as if they were discussing a business transaction rather than a child's life. "He's my blood, my only son, as it turns out. Elizabeth is desperate for a child, and her father is willing to be generous to the man who provides him with a grandson." Griffin took a step toward William, his hands clenched at his sides. "Get off my land before I throw you off." "I have rights," William insisted, though he took a prudent step back. "I'm prepared to be reasonable." "Financial compensation for the boy, he's not for sale," Willow interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. "Samuel is our son. He has a home, a family who loves him. You abandoned both of us without a second thought." William's expression hardened. "Be sensible, Willow. What can you offer him here? A dirt farm and a cowboy for a father. I can give him education, social position, a future with real prospects." "What you can give him," Griffin said coldly, "is the knowledge that people can be bought and sold if the price is right. That promises mean nothing. That a man's blood matters more than his character." William's face flushed with anger. "This isn't over. I'll be speaking with a lawyer in Fort Smith. Blood counts for something in the courts." As he turned to leave, Willow called after him, "William." When he looked back, she met his gaze steadily. "You once told me you loved me. Was any of it real?" A flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or simply irritation at being challenged, crossed his face. "You were pretty enough and willing. It was pleasant while it lasted." His gaze drifted to Samuel, who had buried his face against his mother's shoulder, sensing the tension. "But some things matter more than pleasure. Family, legacy, reputation." As William's buggy disappeared down the drive, Willow sagged against the porch post, her legs suddenly weak. Griffin was beside her instantly, one arm around her waist while the other gently stroked Samuel's dark head. "He can't take him," Willow whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Griffin, he can't." "He won't," Griffin promised fiercely. "I swear to you, Willow, Samuel is our son, and he always will be." That night, after Samuel was asleep, they discussed their options. Griffin wanted to pack up and leave, immediately head west to Colorado or even California, where William Harper would never find them. "We've built a life here," Willow argued. "The farm, your horse business, we can't just abandon everything." "None of it means anything without you and Samuel," Griffin insisted. "I'd start over 100 times rather than risk losing either of you." Willow took his hand, her mind racing. "Let's talk to Dr. Henderson first. He knows people in Fort Smith, maybe even a lawyer who could advise us." The following day, Griffin rode into Tahlequah to seek the doctor's counsel, leaving Willow and Samuel at the farm with Joseph standing guard. When he returned that evening, his expression was grim. "Harper's already left for Fort Smith," he reported. "But Henderson sent a telegraph to a lawyer he knows there, a man named James Sullivan who once saved his sister's farm from foreclosure. He's expecting us tomorrow." They set out at dawn, leaving Joseph to watch the farm, with Samuel bundled carefully for the long journey. Fort Smith lay on the Arkansas River, a full day's ride from Tahlequah. Despite the urgency of their mission, they had to travel slowly for Samuel's sake, stopping frequently to feed and change him. The sun was setting as they finally crossed the river into Fort Smith, a bustling frontier town that served as a gateway to the Indian Territories. James Sullivan's office was located near the federal courthouse, a modest building with a shingle advertising Sullivan and Walsh, attorneys at law. Despite the late hour, Sullivan was waiting for them, a tall, lean man with shrewd eyes and a carefully trimmed beard. He welcomed them into his office with unexpected warmth, even producing a small wooden horse to entertain Samuel while they talked. "Dr. Henderson's telegraph outlined the situation," Sullivan said once they were seated. "I understand Mr. Harper is claiming paternal rights to your son." Griffin nodded grimly. "He abandoned Willow before Samuel was born, never acknowledged the pregnancy, never provided support. Now he's married to a woman who can't give him children, and suddenly he wants our son." Sullivan made notes as Griffin spoke. "And you legally adopted the boy upon your marriage?" "Yes," Willow confirmed. Judge Reeves in Tahlequah handled the paperwork. Griffin is listed as Samuel's father on all official documents. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. That's in your favor, as is Harper's abandonment. However, blood ties still carry significant weight in many courts, especially when the biological father can provide financially for the child. Willow's hands trembled in her lap. Are you saying he could win? I'm saying it's a possibility we need to prepare for, Sullivan replied gently. But there are other factors that work in your favor. The judge will consider what's in the child's best interest. Removing a young child from the only parents he's known would be traumatic. He tapped his pen against the desk. There's also the matter of Harper's character. His abandonment of a pregnant woman doesn't speak well of him. Do you have any witnesses who could testify to your relationship with him or to his knowledge of the pregnancy before he left? Willow thought for a moment. Martha Crowley knew I was expecting when William left. And he sent letters to his family in Tahlequah. His sister Eliza might have them, though I doubt she'd help us. Sullivan made another note. We can subpoena those letters if necessary. What about Harper himself? Any indiscretions or improprieties that might call his character into question? Griffin and Willow exchanged glances. He told me his wife's father is pressuring him to produce an heir, Willow said. That he's offering financial incentives. It sounded like Samuel would be more of a business transaction than a beloved son. Sullivan's eyebrows rose. He admitted this. That could be very useful. He sat back in his chair, studying them both. I won't mislead you, this will be a difficult fight, but I believe we have a strong case. The fact that you've provided a stable, loving home for Samuel, that Mr. Vance legally adopted him, and that Harper abandoned you both and is only now seeking custody for what appears to be financial gain, these are all powerful arguments. As they left Sullivan's office with arrangements to meet again the following day, Willow felt a cautious hope. Griffin's arm around her shoulders was steady and reassuring as they made their way to the hotel where they'd spend the night. We'll win this, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. For Samuel's sake, we have to. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and anxious waiting. They took rooms at a modest hotel in Fort Smith, unwilling to return to Tahlequah and risk William making any attempt to take Samuel in their absence. Sullivan worked tirelessly on their behalf, gathering affidavits from Dr. Henderson, Martha Crowley, and others in Tahlequah who could attest to Willow's character and Griffin's devotion as a father. William, meanwhile, had retained one of the most expensive attorneys in Fort Smith, a man named Frederick Trent, who was known for representing wealthy clients in contentious cases. Trent's strategy quickly became apparent. Paint Willow as a loose woman who had trapped William, then settled for a poor substitute when her plan failed. The day of the hearing dawned clear and cold. The federal courthouse in Fort Smith was an imposing stone building that had witnessed many high-stakes trials over the years, though few with stakes as personal as this one. Willow wore her best dress, a dark blue wool that Martha had altered to flatter her figure. Griffin was equally formal in a new suit purchased specifically for the occasion, his usually unruly hair carefully combed. Between them, Samuel sat solemn and wide-eyed, too young to understand the proceedings that would determine his future. William and his wife sat across the aisle, a study in expensive tailoring and cold hauteur. Elizabeth Harper was a pale, thin woman whose tight smile never reached her eyes, even when she looked at Samuel. Beside her sat an older man with the same pinched features her father, Willow, guessed, the banker who was so desperate for a grandson that he'd buy someone else's child to get one. Judge Henry Parker, a formidable man with a reputation for fairness, presided over the hearing. After the initial formalities, William's attorney called him to the stand. William presented himself well, Willow had to admit. He spoke of his shock at discovering he had a son, his regret at not knowing about the pregnancy, his desire to provide Samuel with every advantage in life. He described his successful banking career, his fine home in Wichita, the nursery already prepared for Samuel's arrival. "And you're confident that the boy is yours?" Trent asked. William nodded gravely. "I have no doubt. The timing corresponds to my..." Acquaintance with Miss Norwood and the child has Harper features. When Sullivan cross-examined him, however, William's polished facade began to crack. Mr. Harper, you claim you were unaware of Miss Norwood's pregnancy when you left Tahlequah. Is that correct? Sullivan asked. That's right, William confirmed. I would never have left had I known. Sullivan nodded, then produced a letter. I'd like to enter this into evidence, Your Honor. It's a letter from Mr. Harper to his sister, Eliza, dated June 15, 1883, approximately 1 month after he left Tahlequah. As the judge examined the letter, Sullivan continued. In this letter, Mr. Harper writes, and I quote, that situation in Tahlequah may prove troublesome. If the girl is in the family way as she claims, you must ensure she understands that I deny all responsibility. Father's connections with Judge Collins should be sufficient to discourage any attempts at creating a scandal. William's face darkened. Where did you get that? Your sister provided it, along with several others, Sullivan replied mildly. It seems Miss Harper has had a change of heart about this matter. Perhaps seeing the child in question affected her perspective. Willow glanced across the aisle, surprised to see Eliza Harper sitting in the back row, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly, and Eliza gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Sullivan continued his methodical dismantling of William's testimony, drawing out admissions that he had made promises of marriage he never intended to keep, that he had specifically targeted Willow because of her youth and naivety, and finally, most damagingly, that his current interest in Samuel was driven largely by his father-in-law's financial incentives. So to clarify, Sullivan said, his voice deceptively gentle, you abandoned a young woman you had seduced after learning she was carrying your child. You made no attempt to contact her or provide support for over a year. And now, facing pressure from your father-in-law to produce an heir, you suddenly discover paternal feelings for the son you previously denied. William's carefully constructed composure crumbled. You don't understand, he snapped. A man in my position has responsibilities, expectations. The girl was nothing a dalliance, but the child is a Harper, and he belongs with his true family. A murmur ran through the courtroom at his callous words. Judge Parker's expression darkened as he made notes. When it was Willow's turn to testify, she spoke simply and from the heart about her love for Samuel, the life she and Griffin had built for him, and her fears about what would happen if he were taken from the only home he'd ever known. Mr. Harper says he can offer Samuel material advantages that we cannot, she acknowledged. It's true that our farm is modest and we work hard for what we have, but Samuel is surrounded by love every day. He knows his father's face, his voice. Griffin is the one who walks the floor with him at night when he's teething, who reads to him every evening, who's teaching him to be a good and honorable man. Her voice broke slightly. William Harper may share blood with my son, but Griffin Vance shares his life. That means more than any amount of money ever could. Griffin's testimony was equally powerful. He spoke of the moment he first saw Willow in the rain, how protecting her had grown into loving her, and how Samuel had become his son in every way that mattered. I understand blood ties, he told the court, but being a father is about more than biology. It's about being there day in and day out. It's about putting your child's needs above your own. It's about teaching and guiding and loving even when it's difficult. He looked directly at William. Mr. Harper abandoned that responsibility before Samuel was even born. I accepted it with my whole heart, and I intend to fulfill it for the rest of my life. The hearing lasted 2 full days, with witnesses from both Tahlequah and Wichita taking the stand. Dr. Henderson testified to Griffin's devotion during Samuel's birth and early months. Martha Crowley described how William had pursued Willow despite knowing he would soon leave town. Even Eliza Harper, in a surprising turn, admitted that her brother had boasted of leaving a souvenir behind when he departed Tahlequah. On the final day, as they awaited Judge Parker's decision, Willow sat in the courtroom with Samuel sleeping in her arms and Griffin's steady presence beside her. Across the aisle, William sat rigid with tension, his wife's hand clutched tightly in his. Judge Parker entered, his expression grave as he took his seat and surveyed the courtroom. Cases involving the custody of children are among the most difficult this court faces, he began. The law recognizes certain rights of biological parents, but it also demands that the best interests of the child be paramount in all decisions. He turned his gaze to William. Mr. Harper, you have established biological paternity of the child in question. Under normal circumstances, this would give you certain claims. However, the circumstances here are far from normal. By your own admission and the testimony of multiple witnesses, you abandoned Miss Norwood upon learning of her pregnancy, denied responsibility, and made no attempt to provide support for your child. William started to protest, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Furthermore, your current interest in the child appears to be motivated primarily by financial considerations and family pressure rather than genuine paternal feeling. The court cannot ignore that you referred to the child's mother as nothing a dalliance during your testimony, demonstrating a disturbing lack of respect for the woman who bore your son. Judge Parker shifted his attention to Willow and Griffin. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, you have provided Samuel with a stable, loving home from the moment of his birth. Mr. Vance legally adopted the boy and has fulfilled every duty of a father. Mrs. Vance has shown remarkable courage and dedication in the face of abandonment and social ostracism. He paused, looking down at the papers before him. It is the finding of this court that Samuel's best interests are served by remaining in the custody of Griffin and Willow Vance, his legal parents. Mr. Harper's petition for custody is hereby denied. Relief washed over Willow in a wave so powerful she nearly collapsed. Griffin's arm tightened around her shoulders, his own body trembling with emotion. Judge Parker wasn't finished. However, the court does recognize Mr. Harper's biological connection to the child. Therefore, Mr. Harper may, if he wishes, petition for limited visitation rights after Samuel reaches the age of 5, provided such visits do not disrupt the child's home life and are supervised by one of the Vances. William stood abruptly. This is outrageous. That's my son. No, Mr. Harper, Judge Parker said firmly. Samuel is the Vance's son by law and by love, which has proven far stronger than mere blood. This court is adjourned. As William stormed from the courtroom, his wife and father-in-law following with pinched expressions of disappointment, Willow buried her face against Griffin's shoulder, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. It's over, Griffin murmured, his lips pressed to her hair. He's ours, Willow. Forever. That night in their hotel room, with Samuel sleeping peacefully in the crib the hotel had provided, Willow and Griffin held each other close, the strain of the past weeks finally easing from their bodies. Do you think he'll try for visitation when Samuel is older? Willow asked softly. Griffin considered the question carefully. I don't think so. This was never about Samuel for him, it was about appearances, about pleasing his father-in-law. Once the banker realizes William can't deliver the grandson he wants, I suspect their relationship will sour. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But if he does, we'll handle it. Samuel should know where he came from when he's old enough to understand. We won't lie to him about William being his blood father. But you're his real father, Willow said fiercely. The one who's been there for every moment of his life. Griffin smiled, kissing her gently. And I always will be. They returned to Tahlequah 2 days later to find their farm thriving under Joseph's care and the town buzzing with news of their victory. Martha Crowley had organized a small welcome home gathering, with several of the women who had once shunned Willow now bringing dishes and baby clothes as peace offerings. Life settled into a new rhythm as winter gave way to spring. William Harper never returned to Tahlequah, and they later heard through Eliza that he and his wife had separated, the strain of the failed custody battle and her continued barrenness proving too much for their marriage. Griffin's horse breeding business continued to prosper, allowing them to expand their farm and hire Joseph full-time. Willow, who had discovered a talent for bookkeeping during their legal battle, took over the business accounts, freeing Griffin to focus on training the horses that were now sought after throughout the territory. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's gentle spirit and his father's determination. His first clear word was "Papa," directed at Griffin with a beaming smile that melted both his parents' hearts. On the anniversary of their wedding, Griffin surprised Willow with a special dinner after Samuel was asleep, complete with candlelight and a bottle of wine he'd been saving for the occasion. "I have something to tell you," Willow said as they sat together on the porch afterward, watching the stars emerge in the clear Oklahoma sky. Griffin turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "What is it, love?" Willow took his hand, placing it gently over her stomach. "Samuel is going to be a big brother." Griffin's eyes widened, then filled with such joy that Willow's heart seemed to expand in her chest. "Are you certain?" She nodded, smiling. "Dr. Henderson confirmed it yesterday. The baby should arrive in early winter." Griffin gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that still had the power to make her knees weak after nearly 2 years of marriage. "I love you, Willow Vance. You and our children, all of them, past and future, are the greatest blessing of my life." 7 months later, on a crisp December morning, Willow gave birth to twins, a boy they named James, after the lawyer who had helped them keep their family together, and a girl they called Grace, for the blessing she represented in their lives. Samuel, not quite 2 years old, regarded his new siblings with solemn curiosity before declaring them babies with great authority, making his parents laugh through happy tears. As Griffin gathered his expanding family close, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that rainy evening when a kind stranger had cradled her head and promised protection, through hardship and joy, fear and triumph, they had built something beautiful together, a home filled with love, a family bonded by choice rather than mere blood, and a future bright with promise. "What are you thinking?" Griffin asked softly, noticing her pensive expression. Willow smiled, leaning into the embrace of the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I'm thinking that sometimes the darkest moments of our lives lead us to the brightest light." Griffin pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest man in all of Oklahoma Territory." As the twins drifted to sleep and Samuel curled trustingly against his father's side, Willow knew with absolute certainty that the family they had fought so hard to protect would continue to grow and thrive, their love for each other stronger than any obstacle life might place in their path. Outside their window, the stars shone down on the little farm near Tahlequah, where a young woman once mocked and abandoned had found not just shelter, but a love that would last a lifetime.